Hello everyone. This is my second lecture in continuation with the previous one that I was talking about economic policy. In my previous lecture, I gave a brief about the Indian economy during the British period and what paved the way to develop economic policies and what was the situation of our economy during that period. So I had in my previous lecture discussed at in discussed in detail about the various issues, the various problems with the Indian economy faced to thrive or to stabilize economic growth. So keeping those constraints in mind, the aims of economic policy were created, and these were the broader aims and goals or objective. So the principal goal of economic policy in India, of course, in a developing country like ours, was to accelerate the process of economic development and thereby ensure swift economic growth and development. So it was worth mentioning that the concept of economic development is distinct from the economic growth as traditionally defined. But economic growth, it particularly focused on the GDP, it more of the quantitative aspect, whereas development, it was both quantitative as well as the qualitative aspect of growth and development. That is, it just not focused on GDP or purchasing power or net income, but it started focusing on a more human aspect, that is the conditions of working, employment generation, income distribution of resources, in equitable distribution of resources. So however, the main agenda of or rather the aims of economic policies in India was first of all rapid economic growth. In a developing economy like ours, the principal goal of economic policy was to ensure rapid economic growth, which would increase, that is increased output of goods and services, help to build up backward and forward linkages, so that essential and effective measures would be taken up to ensure trickle down and the spread effects. Secondly, full employment, which was again a part of growth objective, is to gain full employment, create viable employment opportunities, to find productive use of all available resources in the economy. The economic gains from full employment would be enormous, and it would bring about a better living conditions. In fact, full employment yields the individual security, which in turn promotes progress, contribute to human dignity, and weakens non-functional discrimination. Then better distribution of income, market mechanism left to itself promote inequalities in the distribution of income and wealth. So inequalities lay to misallocation and misutilization of resources. So, and it also leads to a serious breach of social welfare services. So economic policies should has to be designed in such a manner that they could achieve a better distribution of income and wealth, at least an equitable income of distribution of income and wealth from the more privileged class to the less advantaged, or to the marginalized, or to the disadvantaged groups. Then the human welfare, human development, and decent work. Another important aim objective of economic policy was to make human development as an indicator of improvement in the quality of life, which is considered to be an important objective of economic development. There were several factors which included in it, like education, illiteracy, life expectancy. So the level of nutrition, consumption of energy per head, etc., were involved in the measurement of such qualities. So, with the growing concern of human development, decent work has emerged, another goal of economic development. So, these are four dimensions of decent work: that employment and employment itself, that is right at work, rights at work, security and representation, and dialogue. So there were four aspects, that is decent work, full employment, the employment itself, as well as the rights entitlements, security and safety measures, as and the representation and dialogue. That is, there has to be a form of negotiation, and a dialogue delivery system or dialogue delivery mechanism has to be established between both the parties, that is the employer and the employees. Stability of prices and rates of foreign exchange. Monetary instability adversely affected both the growth process as well as the welfare measures. So fluctuations in the rate of foreign exchange affected international trade and introduced a more and more stable way of more and introduce stability in the price rise. Then maintenance of fair competition. Competitive conditions are essential for welfare administration, and these can be ensured by effective anti-monopoly policies. And lastly, avoidance of cyclical fluctuations. An essential feature of free market economies is what we call business cycles or trade cycles, and these refer to regular cyclical functions, fluctuations in economic activity with attendant consequences. The important goal and objective of economic policy is to rid of the economy of the ups and downs and any challenges and issues which would pose obstacle or in the process of economic growth. There is this need for economic policy because economic objectives and policies of government, it influences the growth prospects of any country, which would have distribution implications and social consequences that shape the well-being of the people. So it becomes important because it is just not about distributing the income and wealth between various population, but it also about shaping, molding the social well-being, the physical well-being of the people at large. So choices through time, under a provision of public goods, presence of externalities, existence of common property resources, imperfect competition, asymmetric information, etc. Some of the well documented reasons for market failure. So these need some sort of government intervention in the form of economic policies and programs. So that's why economic policies are needed. And lastly, state through participation in the production activities, it can give a direction to the resource allocation in a more efficient and effective manner to in the larger public interest. It can directly own and manage various public utility services, also known as social consumption of public goods. So living standards of people actually largely depends upon the private income as well as public entitlements. Income depends upon employment, or more generally livelihood opportunities which will be available to people, and the degree of social protection of those who are unemployed. So both are determined by economic objectives and policies of governments. Similarly, public entitlements that support social consumption depends upon the capacity of the state for the delivery of social services, including education, healthcare, housing, allocation and utilization of resources made available by the government, and for those social services. So economic and social policies of the government could therefore improve or worsen the well-being of the people, so that its impact on human development could be positive or it could be negative, depending upon what kind of economic policy has been created and is implemented along with social policies. They could be changed by various, or they could be shaped, or the observed outcomes may be shaped by a range of other factors and other issues. So there are two types of policies if you talk about, or the instrument of economic policies varies between two types: the macro policies, macroeconomic policies, and microeconomic policies. Macroeconomic policies are designed to address the big aggregative macro variables like national output, employment, general price rise, investment, saving, rate of exchange, etc. And and whereas microeconomic policies are sectoral policies and are designed to directly contribute. I mean, they are designed to be more direct and contribute to the growth in the individual sectors of economy like agriculture, industry, services, etc. If you look further, if you talk about the macro policy, it is in the macroeconomic arena that the state finds, its full flow. It encompasses the whole spectrum of economic activity. So the state has to employ different weapons to achieve the targeted goals, and therefore the principal instruments of macro policies would be fiscal policy and monetary policy as well as the general policy. So in general, we can say the consequences of maybe positive, where macro policies pursue full employment as an objective, strengthen social protection, and set aside resources for social consumption. And this also requires counter-cyclical fiscal and monetary policies in the short run that stabilize the level of economic activity, hence output as well as employment. The major part of macro policies was to create employment opportunities. So at the same time, macroeconomic policies, they have to be more conducive to economic growth in the medium and long term goal. In order to achieve the medium and long term goal, the principal instrument are the fiscal policy, monetary policy, and commercial policy. Fiscal policy, the foremost among the instruments of macro economic policy is the fiscal policy, also known as the budgetary policy. And as the name implies, the policy operates through the budgetary operation. A budget is an annual financial statement of the government's transactions, public revenues, and public expenditure. From the core constituents form the core constituents of the budget. The principal source of public revenues are taxes of different kinds. Besides, government can also can also raise large sums of money by borrowing, both internally and from external sources. So this is all, in fact, each of the items on the revenue side and the expenditure side has a potential to affect the course of economic activity, both in the aggregative sense as well as in the individual activity, in the sense of individual activity. Then monetary policies deals with the volume and price of money in an economy. Volume of money refers to the amount of money in circulation in the economy, while an adequate quantity of money in an economy may fail to provide the required liquidity for the growing volume of transactions in the economy, and may thus adversely affect the process of economic growth. And an excessive supply of money, on the other hand, may prove inflationary, and hence in turn may adversely affect the process of economic growth. So therefore, the state or the monetary authorities, that is the central bank of the country, would have to exercise judicious control over the creation of the money, both by the central bank as well as the commercial banks in the economy. So domestic price level also affects the external value of currency. Fluctuations in the external value of currency, that is the rate of exchange, may in turn have adverse effect on the domestic activity. So this is another important reason why too little or too much of money cannot be created in an economy. The total supply of money along with its demand also affects the rate of interest, that is the price of money. Then commercial policy, a third important component of macro economic policy, is commercial policy. Commercial policy defines, broadly speaking, the government's attitudes towards the external sector of the economy, that is policies towards investment by foreign capital in the host country, both in the form of portfolio investment and direct investment. Policy towards inflows and outflows outflows of foreign exchange, goods and services. A state may opt for a total open door policy. Another extreme, another extreme could be when at every entry or exit a call is to be made to the state. A mild protection may be middle way. So this, which of the policies, these are the certain important aspect of a macro policy. Microeconomic policy, for that matter, the state need not be content with restricting itself to broad macroeconomic aggregates. In fact, the state can and does define its attitude towards activity in different individual sectors of the economy, like agriculture, industry, service of different types. So the state may permit and promote certain lines of activity in agriculture, industries and services. On the contrary, the state may also prohibit and discourage certain lines of action. However, the different instruments of economic policies may be identified as industrial licensing, quota permit system, import and export control. There are certain tab on the export, what has to be imported, what has to be exported, what goods and commodities are meant for specifically for a particular region or for a particular country. Then competition or anti-monopoly policy, procurement policy, policy of minimum support prices, and policy of buffer stocks. These are the some aspects of microeconomic policy. If we look into the after the independence, and I had a little bit discussed about that, briefly discussed about that, what had happened during that 19 since independence and 1990, and then 1991 new economic policy came into existence. The year 1991 is one of the most it is a landmark year in India's economic history of as economic reforms or new economic policies, NEP, or policy of liberalization, privatization and globalization, which was commonly known as LPG, which was initiated in this year. And Indian economy witnessed a paradigm shift from the policy of license Raj to liberalization and nationalization to privatization. So these reforms, they have two main aspects, namely macroeconomic stabilization measures and structural adjustment programs were initiated, or structural adjustment measures. And macro stabilization measures included tax reforms, the balance of payment reform, monetary policy reforms and inflation control. Structural adjustment reforms included new industrial policy, banking sector reforms, phasing out subsidies, disinvestment and other factors. Both these policies changed both these policy changed led to liberalization processes in the form of delicensing, dereservation and deregulation. So increasing the role of private sectors in the functioning of the economy, and disinvestment connotes privatization. And therefore, the changes in trade policies like reducing the rates of duties and tariffs made trade attractive. The flow of FDI integration with world economy or globalization, the orientation shifted from inward looking policy to outward looking policy. And the combination of liberalization, privatization and globalization ushered a new era in the economic history of India. GDP numbers increased, industrial activities gained momentum, service sector bloomed and the presence of India on the global platform was being recognized. However, the story of economic reforms is not without criticism, like jobless growth or neglect of the agricultural sector and unskilled labor. But the rise in income and wealth inequalities, rise in income and wealth inequalities and many other aspects. So the introduction of economic reforms was not merely a coincidence, but the consequence of a multitude of problems that were brewing in the system for many years. Factors which led to the introduction of these policy changes, which had been classified into two factors, namely the domestic, international, the international and the domestic factors. So international factors like the disintegration of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic and the Gulf Wars, these factors led to a decline in Indian exports on one hand and rise in crude oil prices along with a fall in international remittances on the other. This was translated in the balance of payment crisis, then fall in foreign exchange earnings and widening of the trade deficit. So domestic factors like burgeoning fiscal deficit and inflation further fueled the problem. The fiscal, to overcome these crises, somehow India managed, or rather, India approached International Monetary Fund, and for grants and assistance. IMF provided assistance with certain terms and conditions which necessitated certain changes in the economic system. Further, the policymakers also thought that it was a ripe time to learn from the growth experience of other countries like East Asian economies and to bring about a reorientation in the working of the economic system. This led to the introduction of economic reforms in India, which were the new economic policy of 1991 in the form of LPG. The new economic policy of 1991, as I mentioned earlier, that it gave rise to the industrial policy, or particularly if we say under the regime of industrial policy in 1991, the list of projects requiring industrial licensing was pruned, and it was in only 18 industries related to security concerns, environment, hazardous chemical, white to luxury goods, etc., were kept under the purview of compulsory licensing. Secondly, industries reserved, there are certain aspects, when we talk about in the industrial policy of 1991, several measures were taken up to liberalize the economies, and these were the few measures. First, the list of projects requiring licensing was just reduced to few, 18, or rather I would just say 18 industries that I've just mentioned, which were kept under the purview of compulsory licensing. Secondly, industries reserved for the public sector were reduced by to only two industries, one related to atomic energy and the secondly railways. Thirdly, the requirement of licensing for setting up of industries within 25 kilometers of the periphery of cities having a population of more than 10 lakh for certain class of industries was removed. Fourth, to boost and invite foreign direct investment, FDI, which was a high priority in industrial setup, which requires heavy lump sum investment and advanced technology. So it was decided to provide approval for FDI up to 51% for an equity in 33 industries like electrical equipment, metallurgical industries, etc. So, similarly, to inject a technological dynamism in Indian industries, the government provided automatic approval for technological agreements related to high priority industries with specific parameters. Fifth, the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act in 1916 was repealed, and lastly, the Sikh industries were referred to Board for Industrial and Financial Reconstruction for the formulation of revival rehabilitation scheme. So, under the industrial policy of 1991, few these important steps were taken up to liberalize economy. And as I say that liberalization, which refers to curtailing or lessening of the excessive state government regulations and restrictions to enhance the participation of private entities, so sector in the entity sectors in the functioning of the economy. Prior to the policy LPG, to the policy of LPG, the Indian economy was entangled in barbadom, excessive state control, red tapeism, and license raj. These factors not only inhibited the efficiency of the public sector, but the overall competitiveness of the economy was also hampered. So, post 1999, liberalization measures included new industrial policy, financial sector reforms, tax reforms, forex reforms, and many others. Privatization again in the broader sense means a change of ownership from public. From public sector to the private sector, and the introduction of private management and control in the public sector. Three sets of measures, namely ownership, organization, and operational broad measures of privatization. So, under ownership measures, the ownership of public enterprises fully or partially is transferred to the private sector. Ownership measures include total denationalization denationalization, joint venture, liquidation, and workers' cooperative. Total denationalization means 100% transfer of ownership, of public enterprise to the private sector. A joint venture implies partial transfer of 25%, 55%, and 75%, and of public enterprise to private sector or private entity. Liquidation is the sale of assets to a person who may use them for the same purpose or some other purposes. Workers cooperative is a special purpose, or some other purposes, or so workers cooperative is a special form of decentralization whereby the ownership of the enterprise is transferred to workers who may form a cooperative to run the enterprise. Organizational measures are imposed to limit state control. These measures include the formation of a holding company structure in which the government provided a sufficient degree of autonomy in the decision making of the company. So the smaller units, big companies are split into smaller units without the loss of economies of scale. The smaller units become independent in certain product line fall, and the government enjoys a certain, the, in fact, the smaller units become independent in certain products, in product lines or regional operation. Leasing is another important measure whereby government agrees to transfer the use of the asset of a public enterprise to a private bidder for specified period of, for example, 5 years. The tenders have to give the tenders have to give an undertaking for the profit that would be passed over to the government, and the government enjoys the right of obtaining profits as per agreement. This was then operational measures include granting autonomy to public operational measures include granting autonomy. In fact, operational measures aim to improve the overall functioning of the economy, and if fully denationalization it has if fully and if fully denationalization has not taken place, operational measures include granting autonomy to public enterprise, provision of incentives to the employees, freedom to buy inputs and from the markets, development of proper investment criteria, permission to raise resources from capital market for expansion or diversification. So various measures in the industrial policy, like de-reservation of industries in the public sector, increasing the limit of the FDI industries, disinvestment policy, the opening of private sector banks, restructuring of nationalized banks, some of the important steps which were taken towards the privatization. In 1991 budget, the government announced the intention of partial disinvestment in the selected PSUs in order to raise resources, encourage wider public participation, and promote greater accountability. However, now we'll talk about globalization. It refers to the integration of domestic economy with the rest of the world, and globalization connotes the reduction of trade barriers to permit free trade, free flow of capital, technology, and labor. There are certain objectives, in fact, two important objectives of globalization: reduction of import duties and encouragement of foreign investment. If we talk about reduction of import duties, reduction in import duties have been important measure for improvement of the tax system. During the 1990, import duties were 300% or more for several items and above 200 for many items. Peak rates were trimmed progressively during the 1990s to reach 35% in 201 2002. So the export policies, the number, in fact, a lot of important measures were taken up in order to bring about certain tariffs to subside, to lower the tariff rates, and in fact the export policy of 1990, it had led to beside reducing the import duties, the government attempted to dismantle the quantitative restrictions on imports and exports. So, in the import-export policy of 1990, the list of open general license was expanded to facilitate easy access to the import of items. The number of capital goods were expanded from 12612 to 1343 under the OGL scheme. Then encouragement of foreign investment. This industrial policy of 1991 had automated approval would be given. Uh, you know, Automatic approval was given for FDI up to 51% in high priority industries. So, as present in 2021, 100% FDI through automatic route is permitted in major subsectors of mining, broadcasting, airports, industrial parks, telecom services. The economic policy of 2014, there are few changes were made in the new foreign in economic policy of 2014. Certain changes were made, like foreign trade policy. One of the important policy which affected the external sector is a foreign trade policy in India, and each FTP brings a new changes in economic policy of the country. In FTP, foreign trade policy is formulated every 5 years, and currently foreign trade policy for the year 2015-2004. The major highlight and feature of this is that exports from India scheme under merchandise exports from India scheme. Under this scheme, the scripts which would be issued will have no conditionality attached to them. The notified goods which are exported to the notified markets would be rewarded on realized free of bond value of exports. So under this scheme, countries of exports have been grouped in three categories, namely A, B, and C. So country A or traditional markets includes US, Canada, EU, and others. Country B, emerging and focus markets include Africa, Latin America, and Mexico. Turkey in West Asian countries. West Asian countries, Asian countries, Japan, China, and other countries. And country C contains a list of 70 other countries like Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, etc. Then service export from India scheme. One was the merchandise export from India scheme, and the other was the service export from India scheme. Have placed the old served from India scheme, and this scheme aims at promoting exports of services from India to make services more competitive in the global market and to provide incentives to export. Then there are goods and service tax. One of the major initiative reforms in the Indian tax sector was the introduction of GST. GST Act was passed in 2017 and by the Parliament, and it came to effect in the 1st July 2017. It is a comprehensive multi-stage destination based act that is levied on every value addition. Then we have Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana to widen the scope of financial inclusion in the country. It is the ultimate growth of inclusive growth to bring the backward and marginalized citizens of the country under the umbrella of institutional sources of finance, which becomes the ultimate goal of financial inclusion program. Then Mudra scheme. Mudra scheme was also initiated by the government to revitalize and meet the credit need of non-corporate, non-fund micro and small enterprise. So Prime Minister Mudra scheme, which was launched in 2015, these micro enterprises, they played a very significant role in labor surplus country like us. These enterprises are labor intensive, need less credit, caters to local economy needs, and plays a supplementary role to the medium and large industries. Then Make in India scheme, with the idea and desire of transforming India into a global design and manufacturing hub and to boost domestic manufacturing. This was also launched and the intuition of this scheme was to create a conducive environment that encourages investment, not only domestic but foreign also, and build a network of modern efficient infrastructure. Then there were other Atmanirbhar Bharat. COVID pandemic had a devastating effect on all the economies of the world, be it either big or small, developed, underdeveloped, and it had deeply impacted the economic system, economic growth, income, and employment. it made the policymakers think the way the economy system should work. And it was at this juncture that the Prime Minister of India had announced economic package which related to pandemic, echoed the slogan of Atmanirbhar Bharat in 2020. This was followed by a clamor that whether India is regressing towards an old socialist pattern of a closed economy, and we are going to fly against the wind of globalization. Through the different versions of Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is already in part and parcel of the Indian planning process since 1976, and even some mention can be found in the 10th 5-year plan. So in 2020, Atmanirbhar Bharat was declared as Oxford Hindi word of the year. There are certain other small enterprises, then the agriculture and allied sectors, as well as the migrant workers sector. That's all about my today's lecture. And tomorrow I will discuss about the relationship between social, economic, and public policy. Thank you.